everyone, and welcome back to the channel and to the world of Aphalas once more. And today we're doing something that we haven't done in a while. I mean, we technically the Arachnylith's lore video was kind of similar to this, but we're actually focusing on one effectively nation in today's one, and it is the Kingdom of Onarkryth. And the Kingdom of Onarkryth is two interesting factors about it to begin with. One, it's the only human realm on Onarkryth, and two, it's one of the only hybrid factions in all of Aphalas, with it originally being just humans, but eventually it ended up bringing in goblins and even some trolls, although the trolls are very few in number, so it is quite a mixed bag. But we'll go into the start of the detail and we'll do a bit of a background, and then we'll go over like the different regions and that. So the humans of Onarkryth are the Ontrath, and originally there were three tribes of the land, and they're known as the three tribes of the wetlands, but that's because Onarkryth is very wetland and marshland and lowland kind of terrain, so that's just a namesake of the regions and stuff. But you had the Asurdaith, the Anevran, and the Asurnorn, and the Asurdaith started off in the south, or the southern kind of area, with Adanhar and some other regions. The Anevron are a bit more of an interesting one, so I'll go back to them. But then you've got the Asurnorn. The Asurnorn are arguably the most numerous. If you were to compare them to a real kind of thing, you would be like comparing it to maybe like the Saxons and the different groups who came over to the UK, the Saxons, the Jutes, and the Angles. The Angles were arguably the most numerous, and they occupied a lot of the north, and they were pretty much the only one to actually split in two originally. You had the realm of Asursen, and then you had the Keepers of the Four Forges, or the Forges of the Four Keeps, should I say. But the Anevron consisted of a large group that led the host of the Bleeding Soul, and it was an expansion attempt that went horrendously wrong, and a lot of their people got destroyed in the attempt, and the rest ended up fleeing back to Onarkryth, and pretty much, or the realm that would become Onarkryth, and joined in an alliance with the other two, forming the kingdom, because on their own they probably would not have survived anymore. But Onarkryth is very much a region that, we'll go into the goblins in a moment, but I do just want to note that it's a realm that's very decided on its fates by the enemies around it. You have the half-ogres of Zakenvraw as their neighbours, who they have on and off conflict with, but then they have two arguably the most powerful enemies to face off against. They've got the wyverns in the Labyrinth of Beasts that sometimes are docile, other times choose to attack, but there's a lot of struggle to be able to trust them. But then above them you've got the first demons, and just to recap, the first demons were Senevia's original attempt at creating the Meada demons, and they proved to be so chaotic and corruptive that not even Senevia, one of the original creators and one of the most powerful beings on Aphalas, could actually command them. So they ended up pretty much being sealed off on Onarkryth, and that's where the Ruby Mist came into it as well. So yeah, these peoples kind of got sealed to their fate, being on a land that gets cut off from the rest of the world by effectively the gods of the world, all because they feared a creation that one of them made and it went horrendously wrong. But because of that, their territories are quite spread out. They keep to the lowlands and stuff. They try to conceal within the mountains when they can. And it's also where the Lost Forges and things like that come into play, because Onarkryth is the only land around Aphalas to develop any sort of firearm, and industrial kind of weapons like that are like gunpowder effectively, but very early on, so spear guns and things like that, but they have proven to be very effective against not just the first demons but also the wyverns. But the problem is that then that makes Onarkryth a heavy target of things like smuggling and criminal underworld and things. So yeah, it's a very interesting sort of land where they develop some of the strongest weapons in all of Aphalas, but that have next to nothing to do with magic, although it is theorised that within the Lost Forges they have elements of being able to lace their weaponry with emerald magic that enhances it and allows them to pierce the wyverns and the first demons, two heavily ancient creatures. And most of the ancient creatures, like, they take specific either magic or particular weapons to be able to actually defeat. So, because again, the wyverns were part of the Thornreth, they were one of the original ancients, or the precursors to the ancients and Naros, so they are an incredibly powerful set of creatures. But just backtracking back to the goblin side of things, because the humans and the goblins work together to design these weapons rather, and the goblins are a bit more of an interesting pattern, because it's only actually one clan of goblins that end up joining with Onarkryth, and that's Clan Belacen. Clan Belacen started off as the wardens of the Sentry, one of the plateaus of Onarkryth. They were the guardians of it, the Watchers, and they participated in an unforsaken rebellion, which was a rebellion to try and rise up with some loyalist wyverns against the rest of the wyverns and the first demons, and they got completely wiped out. So that didn't work, and the rest of them found refuge within Onarkryth, and the humans were initially hesitant, but in the end, once the goblins showed that they could actually help design the weapons and help fight off against like the first demons, and that the humans welcomed them with open arms. And so Onarkryth has a real mixed culture about it now, being a hybrid kingdom with both human presence and goblins. And I also did mention trolls briefly, and if the picture will allow me to move it, the Arnavan colonies of the trolls, Taljealoth, Rothagan, Belsev, forgotten how to pronounce that one, and originally Arnavan as well. Now, originally, these trolls were quite open and friendly, and there was a lot of trade between Onarkryth and the trolls of Talonser in general. But due to various threats and risks, it was actually decided by the Royal Council that lead Onarkryth that the Watch of the North on Onarkryth? Yeah, Onarkryth would be the only route in the north, aside from the mountain gate that tends to be dominated by first demons. But the thing that caused the strain is the people of Onarkryth went to such lengths with this that they actually destroyed every other crossing, so the city, the defensible city, was the only crossing into their land. So it started putting more strain on that relation between them and the trolls, and then you have the mystery of what happened around the fall of Arnavan, which put more questions in the minds of the humans and the goblins. And there are various difficulties. There are some cases where the humans and the goblins don't necessarily get along. There are other times where they work very well together, but whilst most other kingdoms in Aphalas tend to have a sort of a medieval style of warfare, Onarkryth's is effectively like the closest you can get to almost early days pike and shot in some cases, but because of the terrain in that is quite limited on how much proper formation battles there can be, so it's usually more, it's not really even more fast moving either, because the terrain doesn't exactly allow for it to be fast moving. It's more of a case of it being incredibly slow, because again, the first demons are the demons. They are quick and powerful, but the nature of Onarkryth's terrain with the marshland and the wetlands and that, it slows up even them. Even with the demon speed, it still slows them down. So you could imagine like sets of defensive palisade on the fields with small groups of Onarkryth soldiers with spear guns and things like that positioned behind defensively, when you've got small parties of melee infantry, more like shock and primarily goblin infantry with their skilled blades and stuff, being that sort of mainstay. So it's a very broken up kind of battle trend they tend to, and then like again, when they face off against Sakan Raw, it's just border skirmishes across the river primarily. They, and I will note on the human front as well, unlike the Xerxians, who do have connections to the Kingdom of Rothloror, the Onarkryth humans, the Ontroth, have no connections or blood ties to any other human faction outside of Onarkryth. So they are entirely limited to this land. And because of the roomy mist and things, travel outside of it for them is very limited. Some of the only noted times are Aphalas Shadow Dance with Gouzier, the goblin hermit, and they've participated in some conflicts in the past, but not many. And they did commit, though I will note that they did commit ships alongside the Sea Elves to helping out against Rorne Stormcast. Their ships were few, since they tend to focus their ships more around trade and things, but they were able to do this. But if you want the simple note as to why like groups like the Realm of Zakenvor and others want to try and take over Onarkryth, it's not because of the territorial benefit. It is literally because of the resources that they have access to, the development of these firearms and things. Because they do try and keep it closely guarded, but And they have traded with Zakenraw before, but it's normally ended up biting them on the backside, so yeah, it's not exactly ideal, but again, because of the separation of stuff and because there's like a large difference between the northern territories and the southern territories in terms of space, there's a lot of like pockets of criminal elements as well, and smuggling is a very big issue for this kingdom. But alright, we've covered over and I've touched over the different forces and stuff and the people, but now, because, and there's not many conflicts I can really list aside from their battles with Zakenraw, Nacerez and all of that, because they haven't, again, because of the victim of being part of the Ruby Mist and that, they're also a kingdom that in terms of the rest of Aphalas, they have not been involved in a lot of conflicts, so it's primarily just them fighting this fight on their own. Or not on their own, but they're the only ones really in this region except for the troll colonies that are present. And I mean, when I say they've worked with Zakenraw, I mean against like the Nacerez demons and stuff like that. Because it's one of these things of Onarkryth and Zakenraw have a very tedious relationship and temperamental. But as much as they will fight and as much as they have slain each other and the probably thousands, they both see the first demons as a greater threat, so when those incursions start happening they start to think, okay, right, we need to start thinking about working together again. And it also is notable if you look at the geography, they've got rivers that protect their north and their southwest. The Labyrinth of Beasts kind of helps shield them, although it's not like a proper defensive border. And the Lost Forges and the Western Gate, which is unnamed but is just those two mountains above the Asursan lowlands, they are like the proper marking of the border against the first demons, although the Lost Forges are known as the Lost Forges for a precise reason. They got overrun. And yeah, so it's one of these cases where there have been attempts to retake them. Those attempts have been met with various levels of success or failure, but nothing concrete or permanent. But anyway, if we switch over and start looking at their regions for now, we'll start with Aerthin, the capital. So, there, right near the border with Zakenraw. It is also notable that the southern cities, the Asurdaith, the southern cities consisted of Aerthin and Adanhar. They were the two main, so the south was this, effectively, the north was that, and then the Anavron were their own sort of rogue kind of element. But Aerthin is, and instead of trying to think of this on the fly, I have got small details about these regions noted, so I will just read you through them. Aerthin, the capital of Onarkryth. Many folk travel within its walls and surrounding areas, both humans and goblins who are now of Onarkryth, but also traders, those of the half-ogres of Zakenraw and Medeiros, sea elves, and ogres of Hedotelic. Even some trolls from time to time, though since the Ruby Mist these times have largely become fewer. Aerthin also holds guardship over the Adathrain Moot, which still plays host to the Royal Council of Elders, the people who lead Onarkryth, when they come to meet as well as conduct diplomacy with other forces. It is the most protected place throughout all the grass and wetlands of Onarkryth. So yeah, the Adathrain Moot is the surrounding of trees and very much hidden and private area, and it is where the Royal Council meet and conduct their affairs, so that's another kind of interesting thing, and one that they have really only, to be honest, in a similarity to somewhere like Tarrasil with the Feldspar Summit. Although even then a lot of Tarrasil's diplomacy ends up being conducted within Norison. Sorry if you could hear the noise outside. And I will just throw in here, Onarkryth's inspiration was kind of mixed. It's like you have that pike and shot element that I wanted to implement because I toyed around with the idea of making a new age with Aphalas that would start delving it towards like a fantasy version of like the Napoleonic period, and you never know, there might still be an element of that happens further down the line, but pike and shot is obviously the go-between between the medieval era and that, so that's where it kind of plays in, but not to the sort of pike and shot firearm style or level that something like Warhammer goes to with the Empire or Grand Cathay. It's nowhere close to that, and I'm not necessarily intending of making it that far down the line with flipping like rocket batteries and things, but you never know. There's still a lot of Aphalas to look into and a lot of its future and stuff. So that was Aethin anyway. And next up, we will look at Aethin's southern neighbour Adenhar. Adenhar, otherwise known as the Watch of the Rivers. Located in the south of the kingdom, Adenhar is known as the Watch of the Rivers, as it is largely responsible for guarding the disjointed river that marks the border with the half-ogre realm of Zakenthal. It largely maintains the fortifications on the border, though it also holds responsibility for protecting the south and overseeing trade between the network of southern realms on the Isle. The Isle being Onarkryth as a whole, not just a little section. So, Hedotelic, the Sea Elves, Zakenthal, kind of Medeiros, and Onarkryth. Now we will be heading up further northward to Asursen. Asursen, the shoreline settlement. It is the oldest of all the all of the Onarkryth settlements, developing from what was little more than a colony into a full city, and I really should change that word from colony to port, into a full city and one of great significance. Whilst its location is arguably the safest of all settlements in the kingdom, it is still well guarded and dedicates its ships to internal kingdom transport or safer sea travel of trade to the rest of the continent. And when there is limited, I haven't put that in the detail, but when there have been trade or access points through the Ruby Mist, through like Dragon enchanters or Sea Elf enchanters or things like that, or Ijati as well with their eyes, Asursen tends to be the main place where they go for Onarkryth, because it's the closest to like Idros, and technically it is also the closest to Destinal in terms of shoreline trade. So yeah, that is Asursen. So far we've got the Watch of the Rivers and the Southern Protector in Adenhar, the capital of Aethin and its connections to the Adathrain Moot, and then the oldest settlement, Asursen, which, when it came to the realm of Asursen, obviously the namesake was also the capital. So that was an old capital as well. So, yeah. And then we have two others to look over. We have Onarkryth. Onarkryth is known as the Northern River Outpost. Upon the construction of the city, the folk of Onarkryth, much to the latter disdain of the northern troll network of the Arnavan colonies, destroyed all other crossings, ensuring that the city was the only way to cross, with the exception of the mountain gate to the west of the city, which the first demons completely dominate and control. The city is the only northern route into Onarkryth outside of those mountains, meaning in wars past it has been largely contested, and starting to look into some of the inspiration behind Onarkryth, I talked about the pike and shot and the kind of terrain and situation of somewhere like the sort of like the lowland nations, Belgium, the Netherlands and stuff. But in terms of the inspiration behind how Onarkryth works as a people, it's been kind of twofold. And again, sort of leaning into like the Lord of the Rings element and the other fantasy element. Onarkryth is like a northern inspirated new word there, inspiration idea from Osgiliath, the border territory, the one that marks a vital river crossing and defends it. But Onarkryth as a whole, with how it behaves with like the loot and things like that, is I love what the Divide and Conquer team did with Enedwaith, and whilst I know that that's actually a lot of what they did is sort of fictional to actual Lord of the Rings, it also gave some great inspiration for this, but with its own ways as well, being a hybrid faction and all of that, so I haven't just turned around straight up copied something they did. But and what we have left to do is the Lost Forges. That's the wrong thing. The Lost Forges, whilst not a true settlement, they are still a location that holds a great significance, as it is the engineering feats that occurred within those mountains that allowed Onarkryth to resist both the demons and any threat from the wyverns or any others, as it is where their unique weapons were forged by human and goblin weaponsmiths. Eventually the demons came close to breaching them, so whilst the forges have now been moved to be used within the settlements, stockpiles of the weapons still remain within the Lost Forges, supposedly, and that leads to several raids to try and acquire more of them buried deep within the lands and stuff, which also leads to an interesting little idea that's just sprung to mind as well. And it is thought of that many individuals do still travel there in secret to develop more or to harvest the resources required. So yes, those forges are of a great significance. Those are the details of Onarkryth as a whole, and I would at this point start talking about characters, but really there's only two characters of Onarkryth that are worth noting at the moment. You have Sereth Demonbane, who is part of sort of elite Onarkryth warriors who conduct raids and sort of disruption tactics into Nacerez and the First Demons. It's a very costly and tedious conflict, but it's also something that they have to do to sort of relieve some pressure and to sort of get information. They are, you could argue they're sort of like rangers, but not at the same time, because they are very armored up and things. Like they don't wander around in cloaks and stuff like that. No, they straight up go in there like full armor and things, just in preparation in small raids and stuff. or full armor for Onarkryth, which, because of the terrain and stuff like that, is normally naturally kind of lighter in a lot of ways. And these teams tend to consist of goblins and humans, but the weaponsmiths and the unique stuff, I've talked about the firearms. It is notable, though, that the goblin culture does also come into this, so you've got katanas and stuff like that, but then you also have some other things that are quite unique to the goblins, like weaponizing stuff like whips and stuff like that. I mean, whilst she's not actually from Onarkryth, Ganessa has had ties to Onarkryth. It's where she gets her whip from. So they do have different ties and connections with all of that, but then you've got like more of their straight up weapons that they're more famous for, like the spear launchers and the firearms, like what Gousier, the sort of hermit goblin, uses. So yeah. And also, I am going to slightly apologise if this has been slightly disjointed. I am literally recording this first thing, so yeah. But Onarkryth is, in comparison to the rest of Aphalas, still a much newer creation. But I do like the idea of a hidden realm that's also a hybrid realm, and not hidden through like their own choices either. Like, because when you look at fantasy, obviously you have a lot of cases of when industry comes into it, magic kind of takes a wayside, or if you've got a heavily magical group, industry takes a wayside, unless you look at something like, I don't know, the Chaos Dwarfs. Onarkryth is very much industry over magic, but it's not it's not because they dislike magic or anything like that. It's more because they've just been fundamentally cut off from any sort of group of people that can actually properly train them up in it. They have no access to the Kirindrek, and they have very little access to the Dracons. So there's incredibly little magic that they can actually be taught. So, but when they're up against massive, powerful creatures like the Wyverns, who were the original protectors of the sky, and the first demons, so dangerous that even the creators sort of feared them, they needed to come up with something to be able to face off against them. So it's an interesting dynamic, to say the least, that they find themselves in. And I think for now, that's going to be where I'm going to leave this, I think, for today. There is a decent chance, given editing and stuff like that. I mean, no, actually, never mind that. I'm going to be able to get the edits done. So this video will be releasing later today on Friday. I will note in it, and I am also going to put a little post up on the YouTube, that there's going to be a smaller amount of content this week. I did a video earlier in the week, but there's probably only going to be 1 or 2 shorts. And the reason for that... Wait, no, I've already done 1 short, so there might only be another short, and the reason for that is because I tried to do it yesterday and something went wrong with the edit and it just ended up being a complete black screen. So if I can't figure that out, then it might only be 1 short this week. But anyway, with that in mind, please do comment, like, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed, and welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Fellowmind books. Thank you all for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you would like to see some similar content to this one, you can click there. Or if you would like to change around and have an explore of some of the other content, then you can check out the link below, which will be to a playlist. And if you would like to check out the content on other pages or socials, or if you would like to explore some of the other elements in detail, or pick up a book or whatever, or come and chat to me on Twitch when I'm alive, then down there. And as you can see, it has a list of what to expect on each of those platforms. And until next time, welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas, the world of fellow mind books. Please do like, please do subscribe, and if you want to, pop out a comment.